Cliptonians, we're out here in Kedbardu, tell you, and everybody else that Spin to Win is back. I'm so excited to bring this iconic build to Season 3. Before we get into the details of how this works, we're going to show you some gameplay, so check it out. Here's the run. T100 Vault, running whirlwind build with charge as a utility. So we're going to rely on a lot of the bleed damage to come from Rend, from the charge. So every time we charge, it applies a bleed, and whirlwind does a lot of damage to bleeding and a lot of bleed damage itself. So this is a big part of that build here. And as always in every video, especially in these vaults here where it can be kind of scary, anything that is at a range, you got to make sure you close down that gap really fast. Those guys hurt. I'm running to Bolt's Will, which means that I'm a little squishy. This build is definitely fun. It's fast, so we get a lot of movement speed. Every time that you run into big groups like this, you want to make sure that you use Challenging Shout, because, like I said, we are a little squishy. So we close that gap, we get in nice and close, we bounce things around. Challenging Shout when there's a big group around us. And then we find the end of the dungeon. Oh my gosh, I got lost. Alright, we are heading on through now. Ton of great movement speed and movement from charge. All these level 1 potions just keeping me alive. So we are running Marshal. So if I miss one of my cooldowns on charge, because I don't hit enough enemies, I can always proc any of my shouts, and that will bring back up Marshal. Marshal will activate, and then all of my cooldowns will be reduced by 4 seconds. So I guess with this build, you know, the biggest part about it is going to be keeping yourself mobile, watching for anything that's at a range distance, your shout management with Challenging Shout. But man, it is a fun build. It hits hard, does a lot of damage, and we're running no Uber Uniques here. We're getting back that Fury from Bolt's Will and from charge. Let's go hit this. Remember, close that gap on those range things as fast as you can. And then let's get this last room done. So as you see, Whirlwind here does quite a bit of damage just on its own. And then once the elites start spawning and we start throwing in charge, then we're just going to move all over the place. Keep some Unstoppable up, so make sure that is super important. You watch your Unstoppable cooldowns. So I want to make sure that I don't get slowed down here. Fortunately, charge counts as Unstoppable, so we don't have to worry too much about getting frozen or anything like that. But that's a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon with Whirlwind, Spin to Win in combination with charge. Let's go over the gear. We're running Relentless Berserker on the helmet, Juggernauts, Berserk Ripping here for some extra bleed damage, T-Bolt's Will, Ghost Walkers, Edge Masters on our two-hander. This is the great unique for this. It helps with a ton of damage. So the Magnum Opus. I'm not going to even try and pronounce the first word. Ancestral Charge to get that extra stun out there. So we get a nice big line of charging. Limitless Rage. Dire Whirlwind here. Running Ravenous. This is where we get our 2 stacks of bleed from, which does a ton of damage, and we do damage to bleeding, so this is important. And Choker of Elements, and this is our last little bit of damage here. So that's the run. We left all of the Uber Uniques off. Let's hit the training grounds. We'll go over the rest of it. Oh man, safely back at the training grounds. That was a crazy run. Super fun, super fast. Let's get into the skill tree. Coming to the top, as always, we're taking points into Lunging Strike just to get us started. Then we're going to max out Whirlwind and go up all the way through Furious Whirlwind. We're going to do 3 points into Pressure Point. So this way, as we're spinning, which Whirlwind is a core skill, we have a 30% chance to make enemies vulnerable. We're going to do 3 points into Imposing Pressure for 18% additional life, because life is life. Rallying Cry, we're going to go up through Tactical. Challenging Shout, down through Tactical. 1 point into War Cry, all the way out through Power War Cry. 3 points in the Booming Voices to keep our shouts up just a little bit longer. 1 point into Charge, all the way through Power Charge. 3 points into Swiftness, because I love movement speed, can't get away from it. Aggressive Resistance, we're going 3 for extra damage reduction. We're going 3 points into Prolific Fury for more generation while berserking. And because we're going to be charging so much, which you saw, charge is always off cooldown, we gain berserking every time that we use a brawling skill, which is charge. That also gives us our damage reduction here and our fury generation here. 3 points into Pit Fighter for some extra damage and some DR. We're going 1 point into Hamstring. This will give us a chance when we hit a big group, as soon as bleeds take off, we have a 20% slowed, so we can get to the outside of the group and just kind of whirlwind around until they go below 80%. 1 point of Thick Skin so that we can get to our counteroffensive. So this way we have increased damage, and we also have additional DR while we're fortified. Coming down to the bottom, we're going to Tempered Fury for 9 points, because our Magnum Opus does more damage based on how much our max fury is. Wrath of the Berserker, all the way down through Supreme, and then of course we're running Unbridled Rage. Let's look at the Paragon board. From the starter board down here, we're going to be running Wrath for the extra fury generation from critical strikes, and the extra damage modifier from the critical strike damage. Coming up here, we're going to be running Hemorrhage. So our bleed damage is increased by 15% of our vulnerable damage bonus. So we currently have 24% bonus, so this is going to help increase the Ring of Ravenous bleed and the bleed from our Whirlwind. In that board, we're running Ire for a little bit of extra DR from elites, plus a bunch of damage while berserking. This goes in combination with your Blood Rage node. So killing a bleeding enemy has a chance to grant berserking for 5 seconds. That is great, because everything that we hit is bleeding. And our damage increased by 25% of our damage while berserking bonus. So we have 73% modifier straight to our damage line. That's great, because it's an X. Then we head down here. We're going to Decimator board. Here, we're going to be running Disemboweled. Killing a bleeding enemy has a chance to reduce the cooldowns of your non-ultimate active skills. So every time we kill something, we have a 10% chance to reduce all of our cooldowns except for Wrath of the Berserker. That's pretty big. Plus, physical damage over time is bleed, so it increases our bleed damage as well. Then we come up to the Warbringer node. We're going to be taking Exploit here. So Exploit, when you damage an enemy, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. And then it also adds that vulnerable damage that works in synergy with the Hemorrhage node. For our final board, we're coming down to Carnage, and we're going to be running Blood Feeder. So this gives us extra damage to all of the targets that are bleeding already from our Ravenous Ring and from Whirlwind. And we also have 5% increased critical strike chance against bleeding enemies. So what keeps us spinning? We're going to cover everything that is going to work to keep your Fury up so that we can make sure that we can spin and still run Unbridled Rage. A couple things right off the bat that generate Fury for us. Rallying Cry. This generates 20% increased resource generation, which is your Fury. And then also Wrath of the Berserker has 30% increased generation. As we already covered on your Paragon board, Wrath, you gain 3 Fury every time you crit. So we're always critting with Whirlwind and we're hitting multiple targets. So you always want to make sure that you're spinning while you're hitting targets. If you're spinning out in the open and your Fury is going to tank, especially if you're running Unbridled Rage. The last thing that we're going to cover is Charge. Charge is a key aspect in this because most of our Fury generation is actually going to come from charging. Not only does Charge generate Fury when we hit targets, because it costs no Fury, but Charge also makes us become unstoppable. So every time that we become unstoppable, if you go to Bolt's Will, you become unstoppable and gain 50% of your primary resource. So every time that we charge, we gain resources back right there, as you saw. So if we're hitting multiple targets and our charge cooldown is constantly at 0, we're going to get back Fury after Fury after Fury after Fury. So don't underestimate the power of charge in this build and keeping yourself spinning. We saw the aspects at the end of the run, but let's go into it with a little more detail now. On our helmet, we're running Relentless Berserker, damaging with a core skill, which is Whirlwind. Has a 40% chance to extend Berserking by 2 seconds. If we crit, it's doubled. Then we're running Juggernaut, one of the best defensive aspects in the game. Just straight, almost 6,000 armor right to your stat line. So I'm way overcapped right now, but that's okay, because it's better to be overcapped than undercapped. On our gloves, we're running Berserk Ripping. So whenever we deal direct damage, which is just our straight Whirlwind hits, 30% of that base damage is dealt as additional bleed. So it's going to give us a bigger source of bleed, which can never hurt. We're running Bolt's Will for the extra 40% increased damage, and the resource generation, as you saw, constantly just generating 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. On our boots, we're running Ghostwalker. That extra 25% movement speed and the ability to pass through monsters is great, but Whirlwind does it for you, but now we're going to do it 25% faster. We're running Edge Masters on our two-hander. For our one-hander, we're running Magnum Opus. Skills using this weapon deal 0.4% extra damage increased per point of Fury that we have. So we lose 2 Fury every second. So this is where all of our charge and Bolt's Will combination comes in. All of the Fury generation from your glyphs, all the Fury generation from your shouts, because we're going to be losing 2 every second. We're going to get back a lot more than that, so it doesn't really bother us too much. But we have to make sure that our Whirlwind is set to use our dual wield, because we have to be using that weapon to get the damage bonus. Then we're running Ancestral Charge on our other one-hander, Limitless Rage, Dire Whirlwind. So Whirlwind's critical strike chance is increased by 8% for each second it's channeled up to 24%. So after 3 seconds of spinning, we have an extra 24% straight chance to crit. It's great. So that's just Fury generation. It's extra damage. It's really, really great aspect. Ring of Ravenous. We don't have Rend, so the first part of the aspect is not necessary, but the second part, damaging an enemy with a brawling skill, which is Charge, applies 2 stacks of Rend's bleed. So it can't happen more than once every 4 seconds, but the bleed damage that it puts on to the target when it hits is massive. So this is really, really great with a Whirlwind build, because with a Whirlwind build, we're doing a lot of bleed damage and damage to bleed. And then lastly, we're running Elements on our necklace for a little bit of extra damage here. Last but not least, you guessed it, Seneschal. Here's the setup. Running Tempest with Fortify support, Arcing support, Resource support. Resource, I would swap out with Evernight. And then we're running Flash of Adrenaline with Tactical support, Duration support, and Safeguard. Safeguard gives us 15% damage reduction. That is also where I would put Genesis if I had it. Duration support increases the duration of this up to 12 seconds, and then Tactical support reduces the cooldown down to 12 seconds, so this is always up. That's the build. Super fun, super dynamic. Get out there, hit some dungeons. Let me know in the comments what you think about the build, if there's anything else I should do with it. I appreciate all the support. Have a great night. Hey everyone, if you are enjoying the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click that button. I am live on Twitch just about every day. Hope I see you there.